Thanks, David. I'm just going to kind of follow up on Constantina's comments there about investment, because we need, this is the point probably at which the grubby issue of money has to be put front and center for cities. To invest at pace and at scale in some of the things we need to do to become more resilient, and also to make our contribution to a safer planet through mitigating our carbon emissions, we need a very different paradigm from what we've been used to. Now, we will, of course, continue to make the case to national government for funding, but increasingly for my city and many of the peer cities around the world I connect to, we're reaching out to the private capital markets. And that's not something we're very familiar with, and we need to explore how to do that in ways that protect the public purse and the taxpayers' funds. But we know that we need to talk to some big investors about making sure that we can get the kinds of multi-billion-pound investments to make ourselves more resilient, particularly to adapt to climate change. And therein lies another issue, because whilst with investment in mitigating carbon emissions, there's usually a revenue stream from running, hopefully, unlike Constantina's example, renewable energy systems and so forth. It's hard to price things like adaptation measures because of future cost avoidance and the kind of risk that's mitigated. And therefore, working with people like Karina and others, I think that sense of getting a better understanding of the metrics of that and how we price that, and working particularly in our case with the insurance industry, is giving us a better opportunity to think more positively of how we can approach the global markets. Certainly in the UK, a couple of years ago, we had a report by Lord Dasgupta that went to Treasury, which is about the monetary value of the natural world, and about protecting assets, especially in the oceans where actually geographical and territorial boundaries don't always apply. And going back to an issue you raised earlier, David, about a rule-based international order, which is, let's be honest, not looking especially resilient at the moment. And so a lot of those issues about pricing, about insurance, and about funding, and about where the burden lies across people's shoulders for the goods and the burdens that they're going to have to deal with is a key political argument. My other point is that in many ways, again, those arguments go back to a 19th century municipal paradigm about sewage, water systems, the initial electricity and gas, public transport, and so on. So we have been here before. But time is running out, and therein lies an issue. And just one other point I wanted to quickly make, David, as well, in response to some of the earlier chat about spatial planning and so forth. My colleagues in planning tend to use the expression placemaking, which I like because it's much more something that involves co-creating good places with our people. Again, back to a Jane Jacobs approach to urban living there. And in fact, if you see things through the paradigm of place, quite often I think that can help unwrap and unravel some of the problems that we face around sustainability, inclusion, and resilience. And so it's another way, I think, of using a language that can engage with people, just as I mentioned public health earlier on as well. One final thing from public health. My colleagues in public health have what they call a ladder of effectiveness for interventions, which I think applies quite readily across to resilience. At the bottom rung of that ladder is handing leaflets to people to tell them smoking's not good for you, you shouldn't do it. The top rung is we just changed the law. You're not smoking in this room anymore. That's the law. That is a liberty we've removed. Let's be honest about that. And this goes back to something Constantina said. People's liberties are not forever, and sometimes government needs to act on our own behalf to remove them, though we should be very cautious about that, and it should be part of a democratic discussion, which I think is the key point I want to return to, that the changes that need to take place to make us more resilient in our cities, and especially resilient to climate change, are ones that do need to bring people with us and need therefore to be part of the discussion. And we need to accept the fact that a lot of people are unconvinced and will have very different views. I've chaired meetings on the city centre before where half the group wanted to ban cars and the other half said that parking was inadequate. There's no obvious consensus point there, and we're going to have to manage that, and that's politics.
It is politics is the art of getting stuff done. It's interesting, Duncan, that our session for next month is community resilience, where it all starts. So I think that would segue very nicely into that. It has to be community resilience. James Arbuthnot's report into the UK's preparedness and readiness for a major crisis event clearly identified it has to be at the community level. We identified at the ISRM at the beginning of COVID, we've had COVID Watch, Coronavirus Campfires and Global Crisis Watch since then, since March 2020. Some of the people on this program are in the audience are on that. We had number 286 last week. But on the second week of that, so the end of March 2020, when we were really just trying to work out what COVID meant, we said it has to be community-led. The purpose of the government is to support communities that are dealing with COVID. It's not the government that will deal with COVID. It is communities that will deal with COVID. That never really happened. You spoke about monetization. Of course, although you would hope that there's a pull of monetization towards the value of building resilience, we're seeing the opposite. For example, we're seeing companies now and states looking to do deep ocean mining. Now, that will screw up the deep ocean ecology in every way possible, in ways we have no idea of knowing what it will be. And so, given the opportunity to say, no, we will do the right thing, they're going for the very short-term commercial benefit. We talk about climate change in the ISRM, and we say very clearly that from the ISRM perspective, we do not believe there's a problem with climate change. We do not. We believe there's a problem with human greed and stupidity. And if you don't talk about human greed and stupidity, there's no point in talking about climate change unless you talk about human greed and stupidity as a balance to that. Serena, let's bring you in, and then we'll certainly have time to go around the table one or two more times. But maybe we can start looking forward now. Maybe we can start thinking about how the global community, can start bringing together. And of course, there's a significant work being done at city level, city networks, programs, initiatives. But what can we as a community do to help move that forward? Marina.
Yeah, thanks. I think what's really important is, like, if we do look back at things like COVID-19, what's really important is that what we saw was that essentially the expertise involved was purely scientific, and it didn't include the broader disciplines. It certainly didn't include emergency managers in the UK. That was the same across many other countries, and other countries really integrated every aspect of society really well. A really good example of that was New Zealand. So I think if we look, COVID is a really valuable example because it is where we have seen one hazard that's, like one variable that's affected the globe, and it cuts right across all the different political and cultural situations at the same time. So it's a really interesting case study. But if we look at going forward in terms of the successes, we look at countries like New Zealand that were incredibly clear in terms of what the expectations were, what the different limitations were. They made that publicly available. They worked with all the different facets of governments and organisations and businesses to come up with those various policies and guidelines. And I think that if we look at what has been successful, we can look at some of the Scandinavian countries where they've adopted systems like the Danish town hall system, where they have the local citizens become, they write a report, they interview the experts, they interview a range of different people, and they put that forward to the government. We had a whole program here in the UK called, I think it was Wiser, which was went around all around the country and engaging with people around various political issues and scientific issues, and whether it was something that they wanted to have an input on, and if so, what, So I think there are these strategies in place that really help bring us together and have those discussions. And it might not be that we, come to a consensus, but I think people understand other people's perspectives, and they understand the limitations and the complexities involved, and therefore are more invested in trying to find a decision that kind of suits everyone and might have a bit of a compromise, but they understand that generally. And I think these kinds of approaches, of co-productive approaches, working across different experts, is really important. And just before I end, I just really want to just hammer home the idea that, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, which was quite often we're talking about risk, but we use the word risk, but actually we're not dealing with risk. We're dealing with uncertainty. It's not something we can quantify or know. And when we're dealing with uncertainty, we're often dealing with what Professor Andrew Sterling at Sussex University calls incertitude, where we have elements of risk, uncertainty, ambiguity, and ignorance involved. And really, if we're only addressing that by bringing all the different stakeholders together, having a discussion, understanding the different ambiguities, exploring what the potential unknown unknowns are, that we're really actually going to be fully addressing the problem. We can't just do a simple risk assessment or treat it as a simple risk. It's just not going to work. And that's proven, I think, over time.
Sorry, let me just come back to you on that. I think that you're absolutely right. We need to bring the right tools for the job. And the problem is that our toolbox is, I think, basically just not the right tool, either in terms technically or conceptually, in terms of us understanding that these are planetary level issues. These are human level issues. Of course, the greatest gift that the gods can give a risk manager is a near miss. COVID was a near miss. And it was an opportunity to really learn. It would have been a fantastic opportunity for planetary level humanity to come together and say, right, let's do something here. And actually, it went the other way. It did not happen in any way whatsoever.